and welcome to European UFOs. My name is Sebastian, and if you like this episode, then please leave a review on your chosen platform. Any sharing and liking you do makes a huge difference to the algorithm and is very much appreciated. Also, if you want to support me in keeping the show ad-free for listeners, then please go to buymeacoffee.com. There, for less than the price of a coffee, you can really make a difference. The link to buymeacoffee.com is in the description. In today's episode, I'm speaking with Edoardo Russo, a key figure in European UFO research and a founding member of the Italian Centre for UFO Studies, that is CISU. We delve into the fascinating history and mission of CISU, exploring how the organization shapes UFO research in Italy and beyond. Our discussion also touches on the importance of UFO databases in tracking and studying sightings across Europe, as well as the significant event at the European Parliament in March this year, which brought much-needed attention to UAP on a broader political stage. Moreover, Mr. Russo shares his insights on the nature of UFO data in Italy, highlighting a particularly intriguing case study involving a UFO and military fighter jets. Hello, Mr. Russo. Great to have you on the podcast today. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you for inviting me so we can have some talk about our subject.
Yes, certainly much appreciated. Mr. Russo, you are a notable figure not only in Italian ufology, but on a European scale. So how did you personally get interested in UFOs and what motivated to pursue this topic?
It's a very sad story because it's an old story. I began my interest in the subject when I was 14. Since now I am 65, that means that I spent a lot of my life chasing UFOs, let's say so. And when I was young, I was a true believer in just everything I read in books, in magazines. But I was lucky enough to join a local group that was the oldest existing group in my country and was publishing a journal called Clipeus. And I found a sort of Pygmalion raising me and teaching me some more critical an approach, so that very soon I realized that not all that glitters are UFOs, and a lot of critical thinking should be applied to the topic and what is published about it. And that's how I passed from a true believer approach to what is a more scientifically oriented one. That is still my approach now. And my opinion is that this subject can be studied following the scientific method, even if there are people who think it cannot. And there are even more people that think they are following a scientific approach, but are not doing science. And the second important issue is that we have to apply a very prudent approach instead of all the published hype that is usually surrounding a subject, as a sort of framework or reasoning framework. Let's say that we have two sides of the same coin. One side is the phenomenon. People that tell they saw something they could not understand, recognize, identify. And we now know that more than 90% of what is seen and reported as UFOs in a large sense are in reality identifiable, not by the witnesses, but by some competent examination, not even so difficult a competence, even if with a very cursory examination of what is seen, you can arrive to identify as IFOs, identified flying objects, as I was saying, more than 90% of the reported sightings. And these are no longer UFOs in the strictest sense, we are left with a very low percentage of unexplained reports, which does not mean that they are unexplainable, but at the same time, in my opinion, after all these years, we still have not found a sure interpretation. The fact that so large a percentage of sightings are identifiable does not mean that this is not an interesting part of the subject. In my opinion, it is even more interesting to understand why this is happening. It's not just offering people an answer to the questions, because even now, more than in the past, most witnesses are not so interested in having a real answer. They prefer to believe in what they already have concluded about their own sightings. So I am very respectful of witnesses and their opinions, and I'm not insisting on anybody. The more so since witnesses are our tool, our raw material, and so we need them. But as I was saying, there are two sides in the coin. The other side is what we have long been calling the UFO myth, even if the expression of mythology is a non-technical definition. But this means the set of ideas, of iconography or images, of opinions about the subject. And we know for sure that the two sides are interconnected. We cannot say that the first one generated the second one, or the second one generated the first. There are researchers who are of either opinion, and the debate is open, as you know. But what we know is that there is a feedback effect, and we may be sure that even the proverbial housewife in the country now, for a long time, after Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind movie, each country peasant knows that when UFOs arrive, the dogs are barking, the TV set is not working fine. So what we call the virgin witness, that was still a reality in the 70s when I began, is now no longer existing. So many people are already having an idea. The concept of UFO has even been charged semantically. It's no longer a neutral name as it was meant to be when the United States Air Force decided that flying saucers was too much qualifying, interpreting the name, and so they prefer the neutral name as unidentified flying object. And so much now UFO, or the equivalent acronyms in different languages, is now meaning extraterrestrial vehicles in the mind of nearly everybody, to the point that now a new acronym is being searched and found that has changed the meaning in the last few years. So it was unidentified or unexplained aerial phenomena. Then for some silly reason, it's become a sort of oxymoron and at the same time redundant thing like unidentified anomalous phenomena that we might discuss upon. But as Shakespeare said, what's in a name? That would be a very long issue. But
Yes.
UFOs, the topic is very emotionally charged because of the reason it is touching some heavy chords in our minds in this 20th century, now 21st century, let's say post-war imaginary. And it is an important thing to study in itself. If we are talking about the physical sciences, if we are talking about the human sciences, if we are talking about the life sciences, there is always something that may be of interest. Sometimes I use a metaphor saying that UFOs are like a Rorschach ink blot test, that psychological test where you are shown an ink blot and asked, what do you see in it? Well, what we say that we see is telling us more about ourselves than about the blot in itself. And the UFOs are offering an opportunity to say something to us, even if I cannot say, I cannot deny, I cannot claim that there is a genuine physical external phenomenon behind it. And if it was not there, it would be as interesting, if not even more interesting, than just the, let's say, simple concept of an extraterrestrial flying saucer coming from outer space. That is the typical little green man imaginary. Now no longer green, they became grays, but everything is changing and nothing is changing at all.
Yes. Also, I thanks a lot, and I totally agree that a scientific approach that also draws on different areas of science, be it from the social sciences, humanities, but also natural sciences, is the right way to approach this complex phenomenon. And indeed, we might learn something about ourselves, about the human condition, as it were, by studying UFOs or UAPs, as they are now called. So you've been around the block with UFOs, so to speak. You've studied this for a very long time. What was the scene in Italy like when you got seriously invested into this? Already mentioned that there are certain currents in ufology that consider it more on a kind of mythological level, on perhaps a spiritual level. So what was the landscape like when you entered it?
When I began reading about these topics, there was the largest part of those who were interested in the subject. And it was a very strange period because in the early 70s, we were having an explosion of teenager UFO buff groups, literally hundreds all over Italy. It was a trendy subject. We had a lot of magazines in the news stands about mysteries, not just UFOs and so on. So the largest part of all these people, both the real researchers, students, and this generation of UFO buffs were simply sure that there were extraterrestrial visitors of one kind or another. There were some discussions, are they good or evil? A classical question. And there was a minority of people that were more along what was called the paraphysical theory. That is not someone arriving from outer space, but something that has been existing on our planet since a long time and living with us in some other dimensions or something like that. And this was a minority, but it was something that fascinated me at the time. And in my personal experience, it was like a Trojan horse in order to discuss, to context the simple ETH, extraterrestrial hypothesis, on the first degree. And it took a long and complex series of questions about the structure and the superstructure, and what about the superstructure working even if there were no structure behind it. And so even if the UFOs have gone, there was an American researcher, Keenan Randall, that once advanced the hypothesis that UFOs and extraterrestrial had visited Earth, and up to a given year, 1973, when he was young too, they were real aliens abducting people and so on. But after that, there were no more visitors, and the phenomenon, or better, the myth, was going on by itself. It's a fascinating idea, even if it's not an economical hypothesis in the Occam sense, but that tells us something about the fact that there are people realizing that even if there were no unexplainable sightings, there will still be sightings and reports and stories, and these won't go away. I'm not persuaded that the UFO theme is finished, as some authors have written. And in the last, let's say, 7 years, we have seen the contrary, that a new wave of interest, of media hype, of revelations of conspiracy theories have erupted as usual from the other side of the Atlantic, arrived up to us. And here we are again with the merry-go-round discussing about this or that issue. Some very interesting thing. What is most interesting is that this new wave of interest has brought an unprecedented quantity of scientists, academicians, and researchers from the university that entered this subject more than any time before, even if with some naivety, even if most of them are just restarting from scratch, repeating the same errors that we did in the past, reinventing the wheel sometimes. And so I think that it is a duty, a moral duty of us old-timers to try to lend a hand, try to give some indications about what we have been able to learn in the last 70, 75 years. So to concentrate some resources on the most promising issues, not just dispersing ourselves in following false trails, or in the worst hypothesis, and I am along this pessimistic line, when all this will be finished, because the wave will be over sooner or later, and a lot of these people will remain deluded and will lose their interest. Well, let's hope that some will remain with us, as it has been in the past, and we will have some new blood from scientific-oriented people lending a hand in a better way than it was in these last decades.
Yes, it's very interesting and true what you said, that there is a notable interest amongst the established scientists to deal with this topic more and more. I think there's still some resistance, but just this year I was actually on 2 conferences organized by scientists for scientists dealing with this issue. And yeah, sometimes you feel as though they want to reinvent the wheel, but on other occasions, you also notice that a fresh perspective on this topic is quite useful. It certainly got me thinking in different ways about this issue. So that was quite interesting. So you are in the managerial board of the CISU organization, which stands for the Italian Center for the Study of UFOs. What is the mission of this organization?
This organization is an association, so it is made by volunteers who spend their time and money in studying, collecting data, and so on. It came from a previously existing organization, because Italians are known for litigating, among others, and so dividing, redividing, and so on. And it was and is stated that it is meaning to coordinate activities and promote the scientific study of UFOs. We do not have the presumption to be able to do scientific study, but we are keeping the flame or the flag up, so that all the collected data are not lost and so on in our country. So coordinating and promoting, collecting means both citing reports. We have long been collecting data from Italian witnesses and investigating sightings and analyzing those data, archiving them, creating catalogs that may be regional catalogs or thematic catalogs. You know, for example, the pilot sightings, or the USO, the unidentified submerged objects, or the vehicle interference reports, whatever you may think, whatever specific subtype of reports has got its own cataloger or specialized student. The association in this moment is made of 2 levels of people. the first basic level is virtually anybody that is interested in keeping in contact and telling, hey, I am a collaborator, but cannot speak for the group. While there is a second level that is the full members. It's only 60 people as of now, so a few dozens that are qualitatively, may I presume, for activity, seriousness, engagements, and so on, and so nominated by the board, by the council of directors. And the 60 people are the inner circle, let's say so. And it is a stable group. Most of them have been in the organization and in ufology for decades, while the external circle is coming and going. So new people coming, then realizing that it is not what they were looking for, and so on. We have had more than 1,000 people coming and going in these last few decades, because this group was formed about 40 years ago, in the end of 1985.
And are you centrally organized in Italy, or are there different branches, like, for instance, with MUFON?
There are local branches or local representatives according on the number of people. Where there is more than one in the same town, they usually work together. And we have a place, a central headquarters, let's call it so, where we keep our large archives. We have long been having the largest existing UFO archive in Europe, if we don't consider the very specific situation of Sweden, because, you know, the largest existing archive in the world are stored in Norrköping in Sweden. But if you don't consider that, we have a rather large place. It's more than 150 square meters, full of paper, books, investigation reports, periodicals, and whatever. And this has been like that for a long time, because the local group in my town, in Torino, is the oldest existing group. It was originally formed in 1949, not as CISU, of course, but has been regularly meeting since 1979. Each week we have a regular meeting working or discussing. And this has been good for keeping a continuity in data collection, in data organization, and whatever is needed for a non-organization. Because when we say association, that means in our spare time. And while it was easier when we were young students, when you got families, work, and other engagements, it became more difficult. But some of the people that are still the organizers in the national organization are the same ones that have been doing that since the beginning. So it means it's not just something of a passion for a short time, but a very heavy engagement in the good and in the bad side, as you know. We are not normal people. We are somewhat full of that.
Yes, I think you need, well, I think being serious about ufology is to be considered more like a marathon as opposed to being on a sprint. So I completely understand. So you just mentioned the archive. How do you get data into the archive? Is that through field investigators who then collect data and put them into the archive? Or is there a way to report those sightings over your website or through field investigators?
Because of such a long history, so different experiences of so many people, we are literally trying to do everything. That is, we have witnesses directly communicating their own sightings on our website, on questionnaire forms to be filled. Even if I have long been contrary to this kind of data collection because any questionnaire form is forcing testing. There is a lot of literature about it that we have been discussing about it in the 70s. I wrote the first edition of our investigation manual in 1984, and it was written that never use questionnaires because we need to go collect an open description without asking questions. So, well, it's not always possible to do that. The best way is field investigation. Go talk directly with the people, with the witnesses. Better would be on the place, making measurements and photos on place and so on. And we still have field investigations and field investigators doing that work, even if it's not always worthy. It's not for single lights in the sky. Even if it is good to start, even investigating lights in the sky. Once a young man came to us telling, I'm here because I want to investigate abduction reports. And I told him, before going to investigate an abduction, you have to be able to investigate a simpler case. So please, let's begin with some light in the sky and then see if you are able and so on. But we are not just using direct testimonies that we collect in either way. We are still, and we have always been, chasing every single news item, be it from newspapers or specialized periodicals or other groups' documentation. And in the last 30 years, let's say, yes, 30 years, the internet has become an important tool. We now are deluged by social groups made of witnesses, like a sort of self-help group. They are no longer interested in telling their experiences to the newspaper, but it is a self-publication, be it on Facebook, on any other social network. So we are forced to try to monitor all this, and not all of us are happy about it because some say it's a dispersion of resources. But, you know, we have long been knowing that what we collected was just a very small part of the total number of sightings. And the discussion in literature has long been, what are we losing? For example, in 1975, in his book Invisible College, Jacques Vallée, former astronomer, then informatician, formerly French, then American, one of the fathers of the scientific approach in ufology a long time ago, and I made an hypothesis that the more strange an experience was, the less probable it was that it came to us. And so his idea was that the most important experiences were the part we were losing. We didn't know if it was true. It was an hypothesis. We were sure that we were only getting very few testimonies. Opinion polls, for example, in my country, we can say the same all over Europe as far as we have been collecting, say that there was about 6.5% of the adult population thinking they have seen UFOs. In Italy, it was about 3.5 million witnesses. But even if we had we are having a very large collection of reports, let's say 33, 34,000 reports, that was meaning 1%. So we were not having the top of the iceberg. We were only scratching the surface of the iceberg. And we were wondering, what are we losing? The best, the worst, or are we sampling correctly what is being seen? When we had the possibility to be reached directly by the witnesses, you go on Google saying, I saw a UFO, and you find us, because we had a very good positioning in any search tool. Well, we have been getting many reports, orders of greatness bigger than that. And we realized that we were now getting a worse noise, signal to noise ratio. So probably the largest part of what was not reported were the less important sightings, the distant lights in the sky. This is something that we have been realizing more recently, let's say in the last 10 years or so. And so it's not so dramatic, the fact that we are losing experience. But for example, you mentioned the Mutual UFO Network, the MUFON, the American MUFON. I am a local representative of MUFON, so I get the reports arriving from my country to MUFON, and I can say that they are different, qualitatively different from those that are arriving to us. It is like witnesses are choosing who to report their experiences. There are many more abduction reports coming from Italy to MUFON than to CISU. Even if there is the language barrier, it's strange that an Italian is going on an American website, filling an English language form instead of looking for an Italian group. So there must be some motivation for that too. But I am just reporting some things we are still discussing and reasoning about. So it may be wrong, the interpretation.
Very interesting. And I mean, collecting data for a very difficult phenomenon is certainly a challenge. How do you go about, because you've been instrumental in constructing what is the largest database in Europe, as you said, if we ignore the one in Sweden, the archive there. How did you go about constructing it? Is it digitized completely? And what was the process of doing this?
I did not understand the question.
So how did you construct the UFO database that you use in CISU? Is that a digital database?
No, our archives are essentially a physical archive. We are still talking about paper. Even investigation reports that are now written on computers are text. We've got a lot more pictures, photographs than in the past, but the digital photography and the fact that each one of us is now going around and wandering with a photo camera in our pockets, in our cell phone, has not brought us a better evidence than in the past, but we've got a new kind of digital artifacts and errors and the like. But the largest part of our archives are physical, analogic, paper archives. When we are talking about databases, we should be more precise. We have long been cataloging, creating lists. There have been several attempts to build what could properly be called databases. But for example, there exists no real database, I would like to say, in the world, because it's not just an Italian problem. We have been discussing in the last few months about a better standardization of data collection and creation of databases, because the existing ones, even the largest one, especially the largest ones, are very simple in the structure, while those that are very well structured are very little as of dimension. And it's a very uneasy fact to agree upon, instead of just discussing on a national level, something that we have been doing for a long time, because I first began creating a very sketchy database in Italian reports database in 1981. And we have been having several attempts, all of them remaining more or less incomplete. And now we are even realizing that maybe it's no longer necessary, that it would be easier and better to have all this analogical information collected in digital format in a simple text structure, and have some large language models or artificial intelligence tools to go looking, searching, finding, and sometimes hallucinating results. And we are having some experiments about it. But at the same time, we are trying now to build, let's call it a European index of UFO reports, because what is not well understood or perceived is that we have always having more sighting reports in the older continent than in the America, let's say North America, because it's a standard stereotype. Even if just because we have got a larger population in Europe. The problem of our continent is that we are very fragmented in about 45 countries, speaking different languages and not so easily communicating with each other. But our first indications are that the simple total of the collected sightings by the national UFO organizations in Europe is larger than any American database. Even just summing the already existing collections, and you continually discover new things. There is a new international initiative that was started last year that is called UAP Check, and it has forced some people to meet together more intensely than in the past. And in just 1 year of communications, we found 2 examples of what I was telling. We discovered the existence of a group in Czechia, the western part of the former Czechoslovakia, that has been collecting reports from the public for 30 years. They have been collecting several thousand reports, doing the same work that we have always done, trying and finding an explanation for the largest part, having a small residue unexplained reports and so on. After 30 years, this project SAGE decided to stop the activities because it was useless in their eyes. They were just getting reports, explaining the largest part, and didn't know what to do. After that, we met and exchanged our experiences. The Czech group decided to start again because they said, we are not alone. We found that, and it was only and it is still the language barrier. Their large database, several thousand reports, is in their language. So it's difficult for anybody. It was difficult for anybody but them to understand. Now, even the automatic translators, the informatic tools can allow us to have a look at it. At the same time, we had always been wondering about Greece. How was it possible that there were so few reports in international databases about Greece? Well, you know, Greece has not always its own language. They also have its own alphabet. It's difficult to grasp. But in the Italian group, there has come a Greek university professor that has left Greece, got to the United States, then come back to Italy to teach. And when we were young, 1977, 1978, he was my correspondent in Athens. We knew each other. So when we are gray and old now, we found ourselves again. And he has been instrumental in reconnecting us with the Greek researchers. And we discovered that there are groups, that there are as many as 12,000 reports already collected and now entered into an English language catalog. And we knew nothing about it. Of course, the Greek were knowing the Greek reports, just like the Italians were knowing the Italian reports. But the German or the French people were happily living without this knowledge. Are they useless? Are they interesting things? I don't know. Nobody knows. But one of the presently followed goals is to put all this European mass of data together and see. For example, we discover, you were mentioning the Europe Parliament meeting, for example. You may know that behind all this, there is a very small group of Dutch people from the Netherlands. UAP coalition was formed 2 years ago in order to create something workable, creating a channel for communication of sightings by professionals, pilots, policemen, because there was what is now called the stigma about our topic. And they are newbies, huh? They are arriving now to the topic, but they were speechless in discovering that pilots were not telling their stories because they were fearing negative consequences. And so they began a very good activity in their own country, in the Netherlands, and on a European level, the more so since one of the directors has been a European consultant for a long time, so he knew how to move. Well, one of the issues that we are working on with them is the air safety issue. I'm not so persuaded that there is an air safety problem with UFOs, but it is a very good subject because it is one of the competence of the European Union. While the military side, the defense aspects are national aspects and are not yet on a European level. And so each Ministry of Defense, each army is very privy to their data. Air safety is something that is on a larger scale. Well, one of the questions.
Can I just ask you before we get into the European Parliament event? I'm fascinated by the idea of compiling a pan-European database on UFO sightings. Is there any organization that is particularly involved in this in Europe? So, for instance, is CISU in the lead here, or is it?
No, CISU is CISU is not in the lead. We have got our own database, but there are existing similar examples everywhere. Another that was sleeping was the Spanish national database. I should say Iberian because it's also comprising Portuguese and Andorran reports. And it was activated in 2011 by a collective that was called, it was around the journal Cuadernos de Ufologia, then called Anomalia, and it was an individual researcher, Juan Pablo Gonzalez, that had started it by merging the existing databases, the regional ones, the pilot ones, the Iberian landing catalogs existing in that country, in those countries, and he built this one that is called CUCO, Catálogo Unificado de Casos OVNI, and he has been working on that for more than 10 years. And it was a sleeping project now because it was completed. But a few months ago, it was started again. If you have a look on the Euro UFO Net YouTube channel, you will find a presentation that Juan Pablo gave us in July explaining the work and so on, and it was reactivated. So there exist several national databases. There is one in the United Kingdom. There is one in Norway. There is one in Denmark. There are two very large ones in Germany. There is one in Switzerland. Nearly every European country has been having a more or less complete, a more or less large one. And the project is, the first step is to put them all together in order to have not a real database, a preliminary index, just to know in what date, in what place something was reported, and preferably what kind of thing. If it was a close encounter, there were physical evidence or not, and so on.
Yes.
When we will have this one as a first step, we will go on. There are large projects that are not Italian. It's a European project to work together.
Yeah.
There exists a European network of researchers that have been existing since 2001, and it is called a Euro UFO Net, and it's comprising about 100 people. It was not of organization. It was a network of active people, scientifically oriented people only, so not the exopolitics gang or those that are waiting for the Space Brothers or things like that. And they have been doing a lot of things on a very low level, but keeping a very strict connection with a lot of people. I can say that this 100 people have been working for 20 years together. There are people coming, going, of course, but it's going from, I should not say Russia to Portugal, and from Scandinavia to Greece. And this is the environment I was talking about when we were talking about database. It was not a priority. Some of these organizations are not thinking that it is a priority, but since there is a project, usually when someone in the group has a project, the others are following and helping, blending ahead. So I am confident that we will arrive to have a first step completed by the end of this year with a very, very, very first and sketchy list. That will be a first step to go on because the projects are more large than this. Let's say
that's amazing. I mean, it would be first index of UFO sightings across Europe. That's excellent work. And so, is there a task force within this UFO Euronet you mentioned? Is there a team that's been put together to do this, or how does it work?
Yes, it's been formed a working group of comprising at least one person for each country, at least one of those that are doing this kind of activity, because not everyone is interested in this. Or if there is someone interested in sociological issues, may be uninterested in data collection, but normally there is at least one person in each country, at least one organization with at least one person that is charged with this task. And so we simply put together all those that are sharing this activity. There are some informaticians that are not the ones that are doing the local activity, but they are the technicians that have to give us the proper tools and suggestions of what to do and what not to do, let's say so. So yes, there is a working group now. It's more within the UAP Czech initiative than in Euro UFO, but there is an overlapping. It's not a closed shop. Anybody coming up and saying, hey, I am having a database, even dead databases. One of my activities, because I am charged of networking, because one of the few things that I can do for good is that since I've been in the topic for a long time, I know a lot of people because we have been exchanging publications, meeting, and so on. And so whatever, if you ask me who is doing this kind of activity around, I can give you the references of who is doing. Are you interested in neurophysiological effects, physical effects on witnesses? I can tell you who in each country has been working on this, what publications have been made available, and so on. And so this is the thing that we have been extending to the past database. We have been chasing old databases that are no longer existing. For example, we recovered about half a dozen French databases that are no longer updated because the man that was doing that is no longer active or so on. But if possible, we are recovering the data. There is a French researcher, Jérôme Beau, that has long been thinking and telling about this. His preoccupation has always been of not losing informatic data because it's silly lose it. And unfortunately, I could name cases of very famous data collections that went lost for stupid reasons, for something that was kept, very large database of close encounters of the third kind, humanoid reports, that was kept by a French university professor. It was on an Amstrad very old computer. When it changed to other systems, he did not save it. He is no longer interested in subject, but nobody has kept or has got and kept a copy of this database. Another one that was kept by a small group of technicians and engineers that were working in the Euratom installation in Ispra. It was an atomic energy European working plant. There was a small UFO group there in the 70s and 80s. They created a database of reports about a specific year, 1977, for statistical reasons. They built a mixed database of French reports, of Italian reports, comparing them and so on. And it is no longer available in digital format for technical reasons, but we got the listings, the paper complete printouts. And so we were able to use an OCR and rebuilding the original database. And now, hopefully not to lose it again, made several copies, distributed copies, and so on. And this is just one or two examples of several activities that are being followed. You know, there are some large international databases. The most famous one was originally created by Jacques Vallée a very long time ago for testing an hypothesis that was orthoteny, the idea that the UFOs were moving along straight lines, and it was helpful to demonstrate that it was not like that, falsifying the hypothesis. It was the very first scientific study. Then he donated this database to the Colorado University study group that we are calling a Condon Report Committee. It was taken by a psychologist, David Saunders. It was renamed the UFOCAT. Saunders enlarged it. Then he donated it to the Center for UFO Studies that was created by J. Allen Hynek and became the central archive of CUFOS. And it is now still being updated by another researcher. It is Don Johnson. He is now living in Thailand. And it is the largest database. Several other claiming to be large databases in the world are just stealing and using the UFOCAT data. And you can realize this when you look at the data inside. And they are not even often not crediting the original database. And it is the largest existing one, even if it is badly lacking. If you have a look at Spanish reports or German reports or Greek reports in UFOCAT, you can see that there are very, very few. So I cannot imagine how many reports are already existing in the hands of our community, but not shared. And this is one of the things that we should work on.
Yes. So I think it's a really fascinating initiative you just outlined there with the index of UFO sightings in Europe. It's something I hadn't heard about, and I'm very excited that someone is taking up this huge project and actually doing it. And so you mentioned probably towards the end of the year there will be an update on this.
We gave us a deadline, because if you don't give you a deadline, when it is a large, but the problem is that the same group of researchers and organizations gave themselves a few other similar or different aims. And sometimes you are running behind several targets at the time. So there was a necessity for an important article to be published in a peer-reviewed journal in the USA, and we were asked to help create a knowledge base of scientific articles. That was one of the goals that we were working in a different working group. And so within a few months, we were forced to set aside the other things and concentrate on this that now is already available as a double searchable database online of all the university theses and dissertations about the subject and of scientific journal articles about UFOs. It's a difficult issue to understand what is a scientific journal. Let's say peer-reviewed journals with an impact factor not less than a given amount, because you can find just everything about journals that are just you pay and they publish, you know, the topic. So it's difficult. For example, two examples: Journal of Scientific Exploration. Is it a scientific journal? In the mainstream community, it's not thought it is. We are thinking it is, for example, but it's not acceptable to some. Or in Germany, Zeitschrift für Anomalistik. Is it a scientific journal or not? Yes and no. Physiologia Plantarum. that is a typical, well-known, that published a long time ago an article showing the crop circles were unexplainable and then refused to publish articles rebutting that result. It's a very hard issue, but a large collection of several hundreds scientific journal articles were published, and we would like to compare this collection with another one that was built from scratch by an young American professor in the University of Florida that last year published an article, Gretchen Saltman, and she did a completely different thing. She used some specific search motors, asking for keywords, and got 2,000 results. Then she filtered out the errors, the duplications, the impropriety, and selected a collection of about 200 using some very specific words. And so she missed something, she included something, and she created an article with statistical study of what was published in what kind of scientific fields, for example, how many were in humanities, how many in physical sciences. So, but we still have not compared that. We first had to create our own database, and then we can offer something in exchange, let's say so.
Sure. So data collection and analysis is only one part of all the things you do. You're also active in raising public awareness and also political awareness of the UAP issue. And there was a significant event in March this year at the European Parliament. Could you give us an overview of your involvement and what the overall mission of that event was?
Well, my role was very small. I was playing the part of an actor with making a part of the talk. The activity was instigated and really coordinated for more than a year by a new Dutch group, the UAP Coalition. They have been working behind the scenes and contacting several politicians, both in their country and in the European Parliament, because some of them had some specific competence in that, and they were able to offer some of their members, for example, a pilot that has been a witness himself. And so they could knock on some doors and finally found at least one that was a European member of the Parliament from Portugal, Francisco Guerreiro. He accepted to take this in his hand because it was something in his courts. He has never been interested before in the subject, but he saw how to make it enter in his reference structure of what he was interested in as a green member of the Parliament. And so he did literally all that could be done. Spoken interventions in plenary, assembly, interrogations to the commission, and so on. He did as many as 5 or 6 different things. Some of them got media coverage. And in the end, before finishing his parliamentary experience, because he was not standing for re-election, so he had nothing to lose, let's say so, he had a meeting in the European Parliament organized, meant for parliamentary members, officers, agencies. And the idea was of having some testimonies. There were 4 testimony. One was by the Dutch pilot I was talking about. Another one was another pilot by remote connection, because he was one of the American people that had gone testimonying in front of the House of the Representatives subcommittee last year. There was somebody from the UAP coalition giving a general presentation of the topic. There was a Swedish astronomer, a scientist, a woman, that talked about the possibility of studying UFOs in a scientific way. And they needed somebody who gave a short, synthetic overview, an historical overview of what had happened as of events or studies in Europe. And that was the small part that I was asked to do. So we prepared and discussed what to tell, not just to tell in this moment and to have it recorded and spread on the internet, but remaining on the records. That's the real meaning. It was an event. There were papers that formed a file, a dossier that is remaining for a future implementation. So that was the real meaning of the meeting, not just having the media telling, hey, it happened in the parliament and so. No, but creating a precedent that will remain on file. And they are still working on the following steps because, you know, we got new elections, a new parliament, the new committees were now formed and so on. And it was not an arrival point, but a starting point for new activities.
And do you, to make a guess, what sort of changes on a political level would you anticipate following this meeting? Do you think it will take some time for politicians to realize that this is an important issue? Or do you think we've now reached a point where there's a certain momentum behind this and things will keep on going?
If I have to say what I really think, it's a pessimistic viewpoint. So I will not tell, because I promised to lend a hand. And even if I am pessimistic, I will help and will do whatever I can to help those that are optimistic. I already had a very small part in a previous attempt, because when the large Belgian wave of flying triangles hit that country in the end of 1989 and the first months of 1990, there was a member of the European Parliament, a Belgian member of the European Parliament, that instigated a proposal of creating a European agency for collecting UFO data. The science committee charged an Italian scientist, a physician, physics professor, Tullio Regge. He was very skeptical about UFOs. He began a survey of existing organizations like the Japan, that was not called Japan at the time, it was CEPRA in France. It's a part of the National Space Center in Toulouse, the French NASA. And he asked all the national air forces in Europe. He went collecting information. And since he was from my very same town and we had the common acquaintances, I had some exchanges, sent some data. We have been having relations with him even after that for a long time. And so it was a very good initiative. He had a very good idea, because there were some British members of the parliament that cried to the scandal because the money from the British contributors were spent on fairy tales and so on. And it was not that. He suggested that the French study group, the Japan, may be given a European status and so be enlarging its collection activity. Something happened because the French Knesset did not agree on that. You know, the French, they would never leave their own things out of their own country. And
Yes.
The committee, the Research, Technology and Energy Subcommittee, approved this proposition with unanimity, but it was never taken in the plenary session, in the last plenary session. And then once again, the legislature finished and nothing was ever heard about it. It was 1993, 1994. In 94, there were new elections. Tullio Regge was not re-elected, did not stand for re-election. And it was a dead story. So it's history repeating as always different, always similar. And I'm not so sure that we are now to the edge of a new revelation era. But it's because of my age, of my long involvement, of my age cynicism. And I don't want to block more positive approaches. As I said, I'm still working on this in my small part, but I'm not sure that it will ever get, not here, not even in the USA. It's very interesting what's happening on the other side of the big pond. But even if they started with the military, then the politicians arrived, so the parliamentary, and then the scientists jumped on the bandwagon. When we saw that the NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, created a task force for a meta study, effectively, I say, oh, they smelt dollar ideas, and so they said, if there is a need, we are here. But that's fine. That's very good. We had not been hoping in such good developments in the last decades. So, well, that's fine. But I'm afraid that it will come and go. We had even better times, for example, when the ONU had a whole section in 1978. I was young, but I remember the enthusiasm that we had about it. It was born and it was dead after just a little time. You may say that the large world conspiracy won, and there are dark forces from the deep state in the USA or elsewhere battling against. I don't think so. I don't believe that. But our subject, our topic, is most interesting for some, and is not so interesting for the largest part. We can try and get the interest, the involvement of some political issues, maybe not giving us so high goals, but smaller ones, like the Dutch people are doing, is the best way. Let's create a safe room for collecting testimonies of profession. That's fine. Let's ask for the classification of military data that might be good, not for us ufologists, but for some scientific researchers that might analyze that.
Exactly.
Let's try the air safety side. There was a recent psychological study of effects of sightings, the Starlink light trains, on flying pilots that were worried and risked some air miss reactions, undue air miss reactions. So how might we teach them that there are strange things in the sky and how to copy this, collect it? Well, we will see. These are small.
I would absolutely agree. I think there's a time and a place for all topics in ufology, but one also has to remember that politicians by default are very busy, probably not very much interested in this topic at all, and just have other things on their plate. So going in with topics that they can relate to, like air safety and so on, and that actually matters to their constituents, is in my opinion the right approach. And more difficult topics like alien abductions and so on, if you even want to call them that, they're also important, but they have to come at a very, very much later point in time, if at all. So thank you for this overview. You've been very generous with your time. So just by way of concluding, I would like to ask you two questions, because you're the absolute expert in Italian UFO studies. So is there any case in Italy that you think is not very well known internationally, but is super interesting? If you
there
had
are
to pick
everywhere.
one.
There are in Italy too, of course. There are reports that have not gone out of our borders, even if not so breakthroughs or so glamorous. I'll give you an example, a stupid example that I followed firsthand a few years ago. We are talking about 2018, so it's 6 years ago. At around, let's say, 10 o'clock in the afternoon, a whole valley in the mountains was shaken by a sort of loud bang It was more long than just a bang. It was a roaring noise. Glasses were trembling. The ground was trembling. People thought of a earthquake. And this was heard and felt by thousands of people. Most of them ran out, and a few hundreds people, not many, but let's say at least 100 people, were able to see one or two fighters, planes, military planes flying low in the valley, something that had never happened before, especially in the night, but not even in the day, that were going from down to the higher part of the valley and making this roaring noise. Among those many people who saw one or two planes according to the place, because it's a very strange valley with some smaller mountains inside, so not everybody could see properly all sides. There were at least, let's say, a few dozens people that told they had seen something before the planes arrived. When they first heard the sound, some people saw a low and slow white ball of light that was moving in the same direction, coming from down to the higher part of the valley, but not running, silently. And then it stopped above the trees on the crest of the mountain, up to the point when the planes arrived, and then the ball went away. And it was like the planes were following this light. Very strange fact. This created quite an uproar on the media, on the police. There were some parliamentary people that asked questions to the Ministry of Defense. There was a judge that opened an inquiry for public alert. Questions were asked, both to the Air Force press officers and later to the ministry. And what is strange is that several different answers were given, but it was never about the ball of light. It was only about the planes. There was no plane. There was only one plane in very high altitude. No, there were two planes, and one had a malfunction that caused the roar, and so on. And it is all written in the papers to the judge, to the police, to the parliament. But it was never found, never discovered, never revealed what happened really. What was the light? Were they chasing the light? There were even some very silly hypotheses. For example, the French acrobatic patrol that was passing, coming back to France and lost their way, or a drone, an experimental drone, flown away, escaped from control, and they were running to chase. But it's like catching fire with a fighter plane following a drone. Losing control to just descend vertically and slowly. There are a lot of things, but this is an interesting event that involved the military, involved the politicians, involved a lot of people, and that is left without any explanation.
Very, very, very interesting. Thanks for sharing this. Where in Italy did this happen?
It was in June 2018.
The town, did it happen near somewhere? So geographically, where in Italy was this?
Yes, it's a small valley. And the place where the largest part of the people were is called Corio.
Okay,
Corio Canavese. It's in the province of Torino.
Great. Thanks. And my final question is, have you noticed in your years of studying UAP in Italy, is there anything different with the phenomenon in Italy compared to other countries, or are there similarities? Have you noticed any major differences from other countries?
No, there are no national specificities as we are talking about present days and, for example, Europe. You may feel differences when you go to different cultures. If you have a look at African reports, I was recently involved in an exhibition which was held in Paris about the UAP in Africa, and so collected some documentation for them. Or if you go to India or Indonesia or even China, for example, there are some specific differences because they are in the minds and in the eyes of the people that are seeing things, reporting things, or collecting testimonies. But it's more it's not in what is seen in itself, it's more in how it is described. It would be a long issue to discuss, but as of Western culture now, it's reasonably coherent in itself. We still see some differences, for example, with some South American reports that we are not getting here. While when we were talking about 1960s or even early 1970s reports, there seem to be more national differences. Now it's no longer like that.
Very, very interesting. Thank you so much, Mr. Russo. I will put all the links to UAP Czech and CISU in the description of this episode. And yeah, it was a great pleasure having you on today. Keep up the good work.
The pleasure was mine, and you keep your good work. So let's go on.
Thanks.